email, it's EPUB or whatever, it's all online.
But we got 3 of those books for 1977.
Right.
And there's a drawing, so at the end, we're gonna draw and you can have them free.
So that's a relic.
David,
Thanks.
it's all yours. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah. Yeah. Don't clap yet. Well, I lived in the town of Newfield a brief time with my lovely wife. Actually, she wasn't my wife at the time, but we were all hanging out with some students up in the old Connecticut Hill Inn on Trumbull Corners Road, if you remember, the one with the swimming pool behind it. Is that what you lived there? Well, we should go for a nostalgia tour, Christine. Was that summer of 71 or 72? I don't know. But a little fuzzy those days back then. But so I actually lived in Newfield that summer. Then the rest of college, I lived just over the line in Lee Rumsey's place in the town of Enfield on Trumbull Corners Road. So that doesn't really count as Newfield, but maybe not too far. So I was born in Ithaca, and I've spent the last number of years living in the Netherlands for the most time. But now I'm semi-retired, so I'm back here. So I prepared a nice presentation. I didn't realize I couldn't show it, but that's okay, because I can talk as well as anybody. I will then make a link to, I'm going to put this presentation then on I have a web page about the railroads in Tompkins County, the place names in the military tract, the streetcars of Ithaca, and so forth. I'll put that there, and I'll put a link on the Facebook Newfield Historical Society Facebook page, which I think we got that to also publicize this among some of our railroad friends, and then you'll all be able to look at it. But what I called this presentation was getting the farmer out of the mud, which in the 1870s. I'm going to try to bring you back to the way life was then, and why, where the railroad comes in, and how Newfield got all involved in this. If you think back to 1865, what was the situation? You know, the Southern Rebellion had just ended. There was a huge amount of industrialization. People were coming back from the war, and but the transportation in a place like Newfield was still just by cart, by horse, by cart. And in the summer months, you might be able to get somewhere in the really dry month when it's kind of baked hard, and in the winter when it was frozen solid. But maybe 8 months out of the year, you hardly could move, right? You're either in the mud, or you're in the slush and the sleet and the snow, and the transportation was very poor. The whole area was settled, as we know, but the farmers had it very bad. I had a map here of the Tompkins County in the 1853, where, just to show it's similar to that, you see people were living all around. The hills were completely covered, including a lot of areas that are now considered too cold or not good enough farmland. So people were living everywhere. And I found in your Historical Society's site that in 1834, Chauncey L. Grant and Company started stagecoach service from Elmira to Ithaca through Pony Hollow, but that was only on Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And according to the report, most of the time it was stuck in the mud up to the axles, and the passengers would have to get out, help to pick it up, and move it around the ruts. And so it was, you maybe could get a little farther, but maybe not too well. And I think I want to recommend that 1859 directory. I hadn't read it before. There's a wonderful poem essentially saying, for every business, why go to Ithaca? We have everything we need here in Newfield. Very nice, you know, that we have our churches, we have our Cooper, we have our horseshoer. Why are you guys going off to Ithaca for these things? So it's a really nice little poetry there. I recommend you read it. Nice and flowery. I wish we could write our advertisements like that these days. Nice flowery advertisements. Okay, what happened in transportation in New York State? 1825, of course, is the big date. The Erie Canal opened, fantastic engineering project, opened up the West, and it made the Genesee country very, very rich. It made Buffalo rich. It opened up the whole West. So the northern tier of counties, well, let's call it the central tier of counties, Mohawk River, Oneida, Rochester, they were just booming already from the 1820s. Railroads weren't really invented until about the 1820s, and in 1831, the first railroad in New York State was the Mohawk and Hudson. Very short railroad just between Albany and Schenectady, And this was essentially trial technology. Ithaca got into this very early. In 1834, the second railroad in the state that was running was from Ithaca to Owego. And that used canal technology. They had a series of inclined planes. They went from the flats of Ithaca and they overcame the whole hill. You all know where Ithaca College is. And the backside of Ithaca College was the top of these two planes. The first plane ended right about where Rogan's Corner is on Route 96, went straight up the hill through Morse Chain. The second one went up to Ithaca College and then continued on almost a flat grade to Owego, pulled by horses. And in the early days, the railroad company just built a railroad. You could put your car, you could put your coach onto the railroad and carry it. That didn't last too long. They soon developed then steam locomotives, and in the 1850s, things really started rolling. Industrial technology got very good, and a lot of railroads were built in New York State. The Ithaca and Owego was rebuilt as the Cayuga and Susquehanna using the switchback system instead of the inclined planes. It was part of the Delaware-Lackawanna system, bringing coal from Pennsylvania to Cayuga Lake and then farther north. There were other railroads such as the Syracuse, New York, and Binghamton that would go from Binghamton to Syracuse to Oswego. So more railroads in the New York Central, so you had like a really good railroad technology. So this was fine, but where is Newfield in all this? Well, Newfield is nowhere in all this. During the Southern Rebellion, there was people realized how important railroads were. A lot of technology was developed. So in 1865 to 1875 is what you call railroad fever. Really, there was a fever. Everybody wanted. We now had proven technology. The manufacturers were prepared. The northern manufacturers during the war, of course, had built up quite a bit. We now had relations with England again. There was some between Great Britain and the United States. There was a little tension during the rebellion because they tend to side with the South. But now we could get all the industrial equipment from Britain also. The United States was promoting railroads. The Golden Spike in 1869. President Lincoln, in the depth of the war in 1862, promoted the Union Pacific and Central Pacific to join California to the rest. So everyone wanted railroads now. And if you didn't have a railroad, you'd be at a big disadvantage. Tompkins County, at this time, what was the development? We had the Liggett's Gap Railroad connection from 1852. Ezra Cornell, you might have heard of Ezra Cornell. He made his money in telegraphs and retired to Ithaca in 1865, gave his land for Cornell University, and was a big promoter of railroads. But his idea of railroads wasn't thinking about Newfield. He was thinking about Ithaca and Ithaca only. In fact, they had a serious problem. There was a project in the 1850s that would have built a higher level railroad from Caroline out to Lake Ontario, pretty much on the level through East Ithaca, and the town of Ithaca objected because it didn't come down in the flats, and that was graded, mostly graded, and then abandoned. Well, now we're in 1865, and Ezra Cornell, who died in 1874, but in that 9 years, he was very actively promoting railroads and bringing other prominent Ithacans to this. Where does this leave Newfield? Nowhere. Newfield, however, did have one advantage, and that's its geography, in that if you may not realize it, but we're at the correct level, and Ithaca is way, way down below. It's quite a drop. And from Newfield, right where we're sitting now is almost exactly the elevation of the summit at North Spencer. So the railroads coming up from Pennsylvania all have to come up from Pennsylvania and get to a divide, whether it's at Cayuga, or it's at North Spencer, or it's in Wilseyville, and then from there you can go downhill to Lake Ontario, more gradual downhill to Lake Ontario. Well, if you go all the way down into Ithaca, you're going to have grades of 1.5% and 1.6%, twisting and turning through the Inlet Valley. But if you're in Newfield, actually, you're still on a line that's almost flat all the way to Halseyville Road, and then very gradually downhill through Trumansburg, Romulus, and to Waterloo. And in fact, most of your traffic will be going north anyway, because the big traffic there is going to be coal. So Newfield, you know, this level of Newfield, now of course Newfield has Protts Hill and goes high up to Picnic Corners and so forth, but the bulk of Newfield is pretty much at the 1,100 to 1,200 foot contour. It wiggles around a little bit, but that's pretty much it is. So Newfield the town was approached by railroads to bond itself. This was when they wanted to, so of course a railroad trying to be financed could sell private bonds to you as a prominent citizen if you had money. They tried to sell these in Europe, of course, they were very popular. So Germans, British, French would buy American railway bonds, so that would be one source of finance. But another one was to get the town that the railroad was going to go through to also bond itself. And you as the taxpayer are on the hook for these bonds. So it's not like you as an individual person buy a bond and you feel there's a risk. No, if the town votes to buy the bond. The Ithaca, so Ezra Cornell was promoting the Ithaca and Athens Railroad, which comes from Athens, Pennsylvania, which is at Tioga Point, which of course had very good connections to the Susquehanna River canal traffic. Although the North Branch Canal was difficult to build in Pennsylvania, still you had a fairly easy way up from Pennsylvania. Athens is just south of what became Sayre. Sayre was a Lehigh Valley company town. That wasn't there originally. That was built at the after the railroad was started. So the Ithaca and Athens was backed by Ezra Cornell. It was also backed by names you might have heard. King, Estey, Halsey, Williams, Treman, Boardman. If you know some of the old Ithaca families, you'll recognize those prominent names. The Boardman House, you might remember Ithaca College used to be in the Boardman House downtown before they moved up on the hill. We all know about the Tremans. They own most of everything. Halsey's. So Ezra Cornell managed to rope in his buddies to support the Ithaca and Athens. Now, where's that going to come? It is in the town of Newfield. It still exists. It's now part of the Norfolk Southern system. It's way down in the valley, a couple of miles from here, and quite a steep stagecoach ride up. I found on the old maps this was called Nina. And I don't know if anyone knows why it was called Nina. Was it a person or what? Maybe later you can tell me, but on the 1895 topographic map, which is the first map by the USGS, that area is called Nina. Later, of course, it became known as Newfield Station. So they wanted to bond, so the Ithaca and Athens said, well, we're going through Newfield. We'll put a station in Newfield, but of course down in the valley.